They had to drill it open. In the basement of the building stood a vault with a steel door, the kind you would find in a bank, and the only human being who knew the combination had just died upstairs. Inside that vault sat one of the largest collections of unreleased music ever assembled by one person. Outside, it stood a bank trust, a county judge, and 6 siblings who were about to spend 6 years fighting over everything the door was protecting. And here's the fact that makes all of it almost impossible to believe. The man who built that vault was, by common agreement, the most control-obsessed artist in the history of American music. He went to war with his own record label for the right to own his songs. He wrote the word slave on his face and gave up his own name rather than let a corporation keep it. He spent 30 years locking every tape, every photograph, every note behind that steel door. And he left no will, not an outdated one, not a contested one, none. On the morning of April 21st, 2016, staff arriving at Paisley Park, a white windowless complex off a highway in Chanhassen, Minnesota, could not find its owner. They found him in an elevator. Prince Rogers Nelson was 57 years old. The medical examiner would later rule it an accident. Counterfeit pain pills, laced with fentanyl, that by most accounts he never knew he was taking. By that evening, landmarks around the world were lit purple, and the building behind the chain-link fence in Chanhassen had become something it had never been before. Not a studio, a question. Because an estate with a will is an inheritance. An estate without one is an argument. And this became the most expensive argument in the history of American music. What follows is the story of what actually happened to Paisley Park and everything inside it. The federal prison inmate who stepped forward claiming to be his son. The steel door that had to be drilled by a bank. The tax war that took 6 years, consumed tens of millions of dollars, and outlived some of the people fighting it. The museum that opened faster than anyone thought decent. And the small ceramic object standing in the atrium today that means the owner, in a very real sense, never left the building. Let's start where the story starts, which is not with the money, it's with the name. To understand what was lost when no will was found, you have to understand what this particular man had spent his life building, because it was not just songs. Prince signed with Warner Brothers at 19, and by his mid-20s he was one of the biggest stars alive. But by the early 90s, he had discovered the oldest trap in the music business. The company owned his master recordings, the originals, the things themselves. And when he asked for them, the answer was no. His response became legend. He began appearing in public with the word slave written on his cheek. In 1993, he gave up his own name, the one his father gave him, and replaced it with an unpronounceable symbol because the name Prince was, legally speaking, company property, and he refused to sing under a landlord. For years, newspapers had to call him the artist, formerly known as Prince. It looked at the time like eccentricity. It was actually a hostage negotiation, and he was the hostage. It took him 2 decades, but he won. In 2014, in a deal that stunned the industry, his masters came home. He owned it all. The name, the songs, the tapes, the building that held them. And the building was the physical form of that same obsession. Paisley Park went up in 1987, a reported $10 million complex of white aluminum and pyramid skylights, 65,000 square feet, dropped onto a suburban lot in Chanhassen, Minnesota, of all places on earth. Every other star of his size moved to Los Angeles or New York. He built his empire 20 minutes from where he grew up, in a town of water towers and office parks. And then he put almost no windows in it. Inside were recording studios, a soundstage big enough for full concert rehearsals, offices, editing rooms, and below it all, the vault. It was a factory, a fortress, and a home, all wearing the same white shell. Neighbors grew used to the sight of the world's most famous recluse on a bicycle, riding the suburban streets in silence. He was seen that way, outside a local record store, in the very last week of his life. The building was designed so that he would never have to leave, and in the end, he never really did. Sit with that for a second. A man fights the biggest companies on Earth for 30 years to control every atom of his legacy. He wins, and 2 years later, he dies without leaving a single sentence about what should happen to any of it. Why? Nobody can say for certain, and this channel will not pretend otherwise. People who knew him have offered guesses in the years since. A lifelong distrust of lawyers and contracts burned into him by the Warner years. A man for whom every signed page had once been a cage. A faith in his final decade that did not dwell on death. A simple human truth that applies to the famous and the anonymous alike. 57-year-olds do not plan to die on a Thursday. Whatever the reason, the result was mathematical. Under Minnesota law, with no will and no living parents, no spouse and no children, everything falls to the siblings, and the law makes no distinction between full and half. 6 people, some of whom had lived entire chapters of their lives at a distance from him, now stood in a courthouse owning equal shares of everything behind the steel door. There was no shoebox with instructions, no safe deposit envelope. The lawyers searched. The vault was searched. Nothing. His only full sibling, his sister Tyka, walked into the Carver County Courthouse 5 days after his death and filed the paper that said, in effect, "My brother left nothing in writing, and somebody must take charge." The court appointed a bank to administer the estate, and then the front gate, so to speak, swung open. More than 45 people came forward claiming a piece. Claimed wives. Claimed children. Claimed secret siblings. The most remarkable was a federal inmate in Colorado serving time on a weapons charge who declared that Prince was his father and whose claim was serious enough that a court-ordered DNA test was actually run. It came back negative. One by one, the pretenders fell away, until a judge confirmed the heirs the law recognized: 6 siblings. Tyka and 5 half-brothers and half-sisters. Under Minnesota law, with no will, they stood equal, every one of them entitled to an identical share of everything. Which raised the question nobody could yet answer. A share of what, exactly? Because before you can divide an estate, you have to count it. And the heart of this estate sat in a basement, behind a bank-grade steel door, and the only combination had died with its owner. So, in the weeks after his death, the administrators did the only thing left to do. They brought in a drill. What was inside the vault has become the stuff of industry mythology. And here the honest telling requires care, because the exact inventory has never been fully published. What is documented is this: thousands of recordings, full unreleased albums, alternate versions, live films, decades of sessions, some reaching back to the 70s, stacked and labeled and locked away by a man who recorded, by many accounts, nearly every day of his adult life, and released only a fraction of it. People who worked with the archive have estimated there is enough finished, unheard music to put out an album a year for the rest of the century. The tapes were cataloged and moved to a specialized preservation facility, and from that vault, in the years since, new albums by a dead man have appeared on the charts with startling regularity. Think about what the vault actually was. Every artist leaves behind work. This man left behind a second career, sealed in steel, time to outlive him. The door the bank drilled open in 2016 is still, in a commercial sense, paying out today. And the payouts have been remarkable in their own right. A solo piano rehearsal tape from 1983, just him, a piano, and a running recorder, released as an album 35 years later to reviews most living artists would envy. A full record he had written, produced, and then shelved in 2010, released in 2021, as if no time had passed. Demo versions of the hits he gave away to other artists, proving on tape what insiders always claimed, that half the radio hits of the 80s had passed through that basement first. Each release is drawn from the same room, cataloged by archivists who describe the work in decades, not years. Whether he ever intended any of it to be heard is a question the steel door can no longer answer. If stories like this one are why you're here, the stories of what famous fortunes actually become, take 1 second and subscribe, because this channel is working through all of them, one estate at a time. Now, the war. Because while the vault was being counted, the money was being burned. Probate, with no will and 6 equal heirs, moved the way glaciers move, and it billed by the hour. The administrators billed. The lawyers billed. On all sides for years. Consultants billed. By the time the dust settled, accounts of the fees and administrative costs ran into the tens of millions of dollars, a sum large enough that the heirs themselves went to court at one point to complain that the estate was being eaten alive by the very people managing it. The first bank appointed to run the estate lasted barely a year before stepping aside. A second, Comerica, took over the long haul, and in time the heirs were in court complaining about the administrators. The administrators were defending their fees, and the estate was paying for both sides of the argument. That is the quiet horror of probate without a will. The estate funds its own dismantling. And then the government arrived. The administrators had valued the estate at roughly $82 million. The Internal Revenue Service looked at the same estate and said the real number was closer to $163 million, and that the difference amounted to underreporting on a massive scale, with tens of millions in additional tax and penalties on the table. That dispute alone consumed years. It finally ended in a settlement that fixed the estate's value at about $156 million in 2022, 6 years after the elevator in Chanhassen. And on that settled number, the taxes fell. Between the federal estate tax and Minnesota's own, the combined bite on a fortune that size approaches half. Add the years of fees, and the arithmetic becomes the bleakest sentence in this story. Of everything the most ownership-obsessed artist in music history spent his life clawing back from the corporations, somewhere near half went, by most accounts, to tax authorities and professionals he never met. Before his family kept a dollar, the record company never managed to take half of Prince. The absence of one signed page did. 6 years. Long enough that the story quietly turned cruel. 2 of the 6 heirs did not live to see the settlement. A third, Taika, the sister who had filed that first piece of paper, died not long after it. Some of the surviving heirs, exhausted or simply done waiting, sold their stakes along the way to a music investment company, so that when the estate was finally divided, it split into 2 halves, one side held by the investors, the other by remaining family and their advisors. Estate lawyers across America now use this case in seminars, and the lesson they draw from it fits in one line. The man who fought hardest for control lost every bit of it at the door of a courthouse for want of one signed page. But while the lawyers fought over the value of Paisley Park, something else was happening to the building itself, and this is where the story takes the turn that Elvis fans will recognize. Paisley Park opened to the public as a museum in October of 2016. Read that date again, 6 months after his death. Graceland took 5 years to open its doors. Paisley Park took 6 months, and even that nearly didn't happen. The City Council of Little Chanhassen initially balked at rezoning a working studio complex into a tourist attraction, tabled the vote, and granted only temporary permission before finally relenting. There were voices, then and since, calling it indecently fast. A museum opening, while the estate was still an open wound. And who did the family's administrators bring in to run it? A company called Graceland Holdings, the same operator that runs the Elvis Presley estate in Memphis. The same playbook we walked through in the last video, applied at 4 times the speed. The time tickets, the shuttle logistics, the gift shop, the studios preserved mid-breath, as if the owner had stepped out for coffee. His instruments where he left them, the ping pong table, the murals, the doves, divinity and majesty, who lived on in their aviary greeting visitors. Whatever one thinks of the speed, the machine worked. Fans who could never get inside the most private building in music were now walking its hallways for the price of a concert ticket. And the estate, bleeding fees in a courtroom, finally had reliable money coming in the front door. In the years since, the museum has settled into its rituals. Every April, around the anniversary, Paisley Park holds its celebration. Fans from dozens of countries, panels with the musicians who knew the rooms when they were working rooms, dance parties on the soundstage under the purple lights. The chain-link fence outside, which filled with flowers and balloons and handwritten notes in the spring of 2016, was eventually cleared, and portions of those tributes were preserved by the estate rather than discarded. The city of Chanhassen, which once hesitated to rezone the place, now marks the date like a local holiday. Whatever the courts were doing in those same years, out here, the machine of remembrance simply ran. There is one more thing in that atrium, and it is the detail I promised at the start, the one I have never been able to forget. Prince was cremated, and his ashes were placed in a custom urn, produced by a design studio that specializes in such things. Built in the shape of Paisley Park itself, a miniature of the building, white walls and pyramid skylights, with his symbol on the front. For years, it has stood on display in the atrium, at the heart of the real building it copies. Visitors walk past it, some without realizing what it is. The house inside the house. The owner, home, permanently, in the one place he controlled completely. So, where does Paisley Park stand today? The estate argument is over. Value settled at roughly $156 million. Ownership divided between the investment side and the family side. The 6-year fee bonfire finally out. The vault keeps releasing. Full albums, deluxe archives, films, each one advertised, without irony, as coming from the vault. The building runs as both museum and working studio. Artists still record there. The city that once hesitated now lights itself purple every April. In 2017, the Pantone Company even created an official shade of purple in his honor, so that the color itself, like the name and the masters before it, finally belongs to him. And maybe that's the strangest symmetry in this whole series so far. Elvis Presley left a will, a clear one, and his house still nearly died 3 times, saved only by a $5 gamble. Prince left no will at all. The one document his life's battles should have taught him to write. And his house was saved anyway, by the machinery his chaos forced into existence. One legacy nearly drowned with a map. The other swam without one. What neither man controlled in the end was the only thing that actually decided the outcome. What the living chose to do with the door. Now it's your turn, and I read every single comment. Was opening Paisley Park 6 months after his death the right call, or indecently fast? And the vault, should everything in it eventually be released? Or was a man who locked it behind steel telling us exactly what he wanted? Tell me what you think, and tell me which country you're watching from. Subscribe for the next one, because it might be the strangest document story in this entire series. When Aretha Franklin died, they said she left no will either. Then somebody looked under the couch cushions and found 2.